Scuderia Ferrari had a disastrous weekend at the 4.36 1-kilometer Circuit Gilles-Villeneuve in Montreal. To put it bluntly, the fans of the Maranello team can accept hearing everything from team principal Frederic Vasseur, except the words we need to understand. You see, this is a repeated and recurring statement heard from the previous management during Formula One seasons that have brought few satisfactions for the tifosi. In the disastrous Canadian Grand Prix, the Italian side showed its worst version in this first part of the championship. Honestly, it is almost impossible to find anything positive in the Montreal weekend. As it should be, Frederic Vasseur hopes that the various difficulties which can appear in a race during such a long season have manifested all together on North American soil, with both drivers failing to enter Q3 in Saturday's qualifying session before recording a double retirement in the Sunday race at the Circuit Gilles-Villeneuve. This was very painful, considering the impact on the World Championship rankings, particularly that of the constructors, as Ferrari genuinely feels it can challenge Red Bull, who is only relying on Max Verstappen and has to deal with the poor performances of his Red Bull teammate, Sergio Perez. Despite the two drivers of the prancing horse reporting a lack of grip since the final free practice session in Montreal, the French manager admits that the Maranello team was still confident they could straighten out the situation and would secure a decent result in the Canadian Grand Prix. According to the French manager, the pace of the Reds on Friday was promising. Nevertheless, it must be said that on the first day of free practice, the track activity was so scarce that it could not provide real certainties except compared to simulations. Perhaps this was precisely the problem, not having a factual feedback that could have triggered the alarm to review the entire setup that had been identified in Maranello during the week leading to the Canadian Grand Prix. An action that would most likely have changed Ferrari's fortunes and given Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc the chance to fight at the top against Red Bull, McLaren, and Mercedes without problems. Although for the always cheerful Fred Vasseur, 2024 represents his first real Formula One season at the top of the Ferrari racing department. Keeping in mind the last racing campaign, despite an inherited and uncompetitive project, the Frenchman had never witnessed such a disheartening performance from his side. Despite everything seeming to go against them, Frederic Vasseur stressed that the Canadian setback will not change the Maranello team's new approach, a mentality through which one must not be afraid to take risks in order to raise the bar. Obviously, a good manager cannot remain insensitive to the discouragement of his men. Charles Leclerc, for example, went in the span of a week from the exhilarating celebrations following the splendid race win in the Monaco Grand Prix to the dust and disappointment of Montreal. The head of the Ferrari racing department clearly understands the frustration of a driver forced to race with serious technical problems that made it impossible to fight against the competition. He considers it a more than legitimate feeling that confirms his mentality. The double technical retirement of the SF24 cars is significant in the economy of a Formula One championship that seems open to any scenario. However, the Ferrari team boss maintains that such circumstances are part of the normal dynamics of a very long season. Fred Vasseur referred to Red Bull's difficult weekend seen in Monaco as evidence that the balance of power could change within any weekend. There are still 15 races to go, during which further difficulties will knock on the door of all teams. For this reason, the priority remains to maintain the same approach and at the same time continue to develop the car and solve the headaches. Ferrari were not world champions after a good weekend in Monaco, and are not the worst of the bunch after a difficult weekend in Montreal, as pointed out by the Frenchman, who remained confident the Italian side will return with great pace for the Spanish Grand Prix at the Circuit de Catalunya in Barcelona. One of Frederic Vasseur's fundamental targets is to shield the Italian team from the mood swings of the fans, that we know are amplified also by the media, which are certainly read within the Ferrari racing division. Having the ability to temper enthusiasm for partial successes, and conversely, avoid unnecessary depressions when results do not meet expectations, remains the best thing to do. This reasoning certainly cannot make one forget that the Canadian weekend went well beyond the worst expectations of the Ferrari engineers, technicians, and drivers. For the first time since taking the helm at Ferrari, the Frenchman is asked to make a strong effort to demonstrate that Montreal is just an isolated episode. The need to regain the competitiveness appreciated at the Imola circuit in Italy and then in Monaco is paramount. The Spanish Grand Prix, the next round of the Formula One Championship, is certainly a significant test of the real value of the SF24 compared to its rivals. A weekend at the Circuit de Catalunya in Barcelona, where the red team will try to fight again for the race victory, without fear, aware that the balance of power is currently very delicate between the top teams and it takes very little to change things. Looking back at the Canadian Grand Prix, if the Ferrari drivers had managed to climb back into the top 10, it would have been a way to limit the damage, but not the result Ferrari was hoping for. The focus now is more on the reasons why the SF24 failed to perform at the expected levels. The lackluster performance does not sound an alarm, but it is a clear indication that there is still work to be done, not only to beat Red Bull, but also to find consistency compared to a very solid McLaren, which has seemed to be the best compromise on circuits that have highlighted the weaknesses of the RB20. A setback that does not represent the absolute value of the Italian car, but it is clear that more was expected from the Canadian weekend, even after a Friday when the drivers were satisfied and offered positive comments on the car's potential. However, the first day of practice told only half the story, not only because of what happened during the rest of the weekend, but also because of the track conditions. With the asphalt still damp, the cars were running significantly slower times than on Saturday, and even on intermediates, the track was more dry than wet, heating the tires more quickly. Strange conditions that did not reoccur on Saturday, the day that dashed Ferrari's hopes. Although it shares some points in common with Monaco, the Montreal circuit also presents many differences. In Monaco, there are many slow corners where mechanical grip and stability on bumps make a difference, whereas in Canada, the balance shifts more towards aerodynamics. However, it is still about low to medium speed corners, without very fast turns that can put energy into the tires. It is no coincidence that graining is discussed in Montreal because the outer surface, with many traction phases, tends to heat up before the carcass, but on a single lap, the warm-up issue becomes crucial. On Saturday, Ferrari struggled to heat up the tires despite the increase in asphalt temperatures, never reaching the times that the teams had predicted before the weekend. It was estimated that times could drop between 1:11.7 and 1:12 o'clock, and indeed it was so, but not for Ferrari. The new, very smooth track surface, partially removing some of the bumps that characterized Montreal, especially in the second sector, perhaps did not help, but it was not a central element in the analysis. Furthermore, while it is true that the Canadian weekend brings to mind the difficulties of China, where the surface layer of the asphalt was reviewed for the return of F1 after several years of absence, the two events have little in common. Shanghai also features many high-speed corners where the tires can heat up, but the smooth asphalt and low temperatures mainly contributed to different management of balance and limiting axis, penalizing Ferrari's setup. These aspects did not recur in the same way in Montreal. The SF24's difficulty in extracting the best from the tires on a single lap is not new, but a well-known issue this season, although at the beginning of the championship, with a more distant McLaren, the drivers still managed to achieve good results in most cases. Now, with the increasingly competitive MCL 38, a step forward is needed. This is also why a setback does not sound the alarm at maximum volume, but confirms that when the car does not work in its ideal window, there is still work to be done with future updates. Adding downforce helps, but it is not always the answer to all problems.